Welcome back to Her Silent Revenge. Before we begin, I want you to take a breath, because what I'm about to share with you, it still doesn't feel real, even now. The morning of my husband's burial, I wore the black dress he had always hated. He used to say it made me look like I was already grieving something. I never understood what he meant by that. I do now. Daniel had been gone for 11 days when we finally put him in the ground. The medical examiner needed time, they said. Routine, they said. A 34-year-old man in perfect health doesn't just collapse in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon, but apparently the paperwork still takes 11 days. And apparently I was supposed to spend those 11 days accepting casseroles from neighbors and nodding when people told me he was in a better place. I spent those 11 days staring at the ceiling. We had been married for 6 years. We met at a conference in Denver. I was 26, he was 28, and he spilled coffee on my laptop bag and spent 20 minutes apologizing. I told him it was fine. He asked if he could buy me another coffee to make up for it. I said yes. That was it. That was the whole beginning of my life with him. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was a civil engineer. He coached youth soccer on weekends, even though, by his own admission, he was terrible at soccer. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. He left the cabinet doors open, and it drove me absolutely insane. And I would have given anything to walk into my kitchen one more time and find every single one of them open. The funeral was held at St. Augustine's in Raleigh, North Carolina. His family filled the left side of the church. My family sat on the right. His older brother, Marcus, sat in the front row with his wife, Diane, and their 2 kids, and he cried louder than anyone. People kept going up to him after the service, holding his hands, telling him how sorry they were. I watched him accept every hug with his eyes closed, and I felt nothing. That should have told me something. Afterward, at the reception at his parents' house, I moved through rooms like a ghost. People handed me food I didn't eat and drinks I didn't finish. His mother held both my hands for a long time without saying anything, which was the kindest thing anyone did that day. I was standing near the back door, trying to get a few minutes alone, when I felt someone step beside me. I turned. It was a man I recognized but didn't know well, Paul Whitfield, Daniel's attorney. He had handled Daniel's estate planning when we bought our house 2 years ago. I had met him exactly twice. He was holding a plain white envelope, sealed with my name written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. I felt the floor shift under me. Paul spoke quietly, his voice so low I had to lean in. He said Daniel had given him the envelope 8 weeks ago with specific instructions. He said Daniel had been very clear I was to open it alone, and under no circumstances was I to let Marcus know it existed. I stared at the envelope. Paul pressed it into my hand and then he was gone, folding back into the crowd like he had never been there at all. I stood with that envelope for the rest of the reception, and I didn't open it. I held it against my side with my arm pressed down over it, and I smiled when people spoke to me, and I waited. I don't know how I waited. Some part of me already understood that whatever was inside was going to change everything, and I needed walls around me when that happened. I needed to be home, alone. With the door locked, I got back to our house at a little past 7 that evening. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten breakfast every morning for 6 years, where he did the crossword puzzle in pen and left the sections scattered everywhere. And I opened the envelope. There were 2 things inside. The first was a letter in Daniel's handwriting. 4 pages, both sides, written small and careful like he was trying to fit in everything he needed to say. The second was a USB drive. I read the letter first. He started by telling me he loved me. He said it 3 times in the first paragraph, which wasn't like him. Daniel showed love in coffee, loved warming on the counter, and tanked negotiations at car dealerships because he refused to let salesmen pressure me. He didn't say I love you 3 times in a row unless something was very wrong. Then he told me he was scared. He had discovered something 14 months ago, not by looking, but by accident. A bank routing number that didn't match. A transfer from their father's estate account that he hadn't authorized and shouldn't have existed. He was a co-executor of the estate alongside Marcus, which meant he had access to all the same records. He started looking more carefully. What he found took him 4 months to understand and another 2 months to accept, because it meant accepting that his brother, his older brother who had taught him to drive and stood beside him at our wedding, had been quietly, methodically stealing from their parents for years. Not from the estate. From their parents directly. His father, Robert Mercer, had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 18 months ago. His mother didn't know the full extent of it. Nobody did, except apparently Marcus, who had started using that window of confusion to shift assets, small amounts at first, then larger ones, into a separate account that only he controlled. The estate wasn't the target. Their father's investment portfolio was. By the time Daniel found the first discrepancy, Marcus had already moved over $300,000. Daniel wrote that he had confronted Marcus once, privately. Marcus had cried and promised to fix it and told Daniel that he had gotten into some serious financial trouble and just needed time. He said Diane didn't know. He said he would put every dollar back before their father ever noticed. Daniel gave him 60 days. The money never came back. But 3 weeks later, a car ran a red light and hit Daniel's car from the driver's side at 40 miles an hour in the parking garage downtown. The police called it an accident. The other driver had no prior record. The insurance company paid out without dispute. But Daniel survived. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, a week in the hospital. And while he was lying in that hospital bed, he started to think. And the more he thought, the less he believed in coincidence. He didn't tell me any of this. I went over that in my head for a long time, the anger of it. How could he not tell me? But by the end of the letter, I understood. He was trying to protect me. He was afraid that if Marcus knew I was aware, I became a target too. He wrote that clearly in those exact words, "I cannot put you in that position. If something happens to me, the letter and the drive will explain everything. If nothing happens, I will handle it myself and you will never need to know." Something happened. The USB had 3 folders on it. The first contained scanned bank statements, 14 months of them, annotated in Daniel's handwriting in the margins, with dates and amounts circled. The second folder had a video file. The third had a document Daniel had titled simply for law enforcement. I watched the video file first. It was Daniel, sitting at his desk in the home office down the hall, speaking directly into the camera. He was wearing the gray Henley he wore on weekends. He looked tired but steady. He stated his full name, the date, and then spent 41 minutes walking through everything he had found, the account numbers, the transfer dates, the discrepancies between the estate records and the actual portfolio balances. He spoke slowly and clearly, like he was testifying, like he knew that's exactly what this might become. At the end of the video, he paused for a moment and looked directly into the camera and said, "Sarah, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I carried this alone. I'm sorry I didn't find a way to tell you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I need you to be careful. Go to someone you trust. Don't do this alone." I watched that video 3 times before I could move. The next morning, I called Paul Whitfield. I told him I had opened the envelope. I told him what was in it. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said he needed to speak with a colleague before he could advise me further, and that I should not contact Marcus or Diane or anyone in Daniel's family until we had spoken again. I said I understood. Paul called back 4 hours later. He had already spoken with a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Charlotte. They wanted to see the drive. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte with 2 FBI agents and a forensic accountant who worked for the agency. I brought the USB drive and a printed copy of the bank statements Daniel had scanned. I brought Daniel's 4-page letter in its original envelope. I sat across the table from people who did not know my husband, and I watched them review his work. 14 months of careful, methodical documentation that he had built alone, in secret, in the evenings after I went to sleep, probably, and I could tell within the first 30 minutes that what Daniel had compiled was not amateur, it was thorough, it was organized. It was, in the words of the forensic accountant, one of the cleaner evidence packages I've seen come in without a legal team behind it. Daniel had known he was building a case. He just hadn't known for certain that he wouldn't be around to hand it over himself. The investigation took 4 months. I was not part of most of it. The agents checked in periodically, asked clarifying questions about timelines, asked me once about the car accident, asked me once about the condition of Daniel's father and who held medical power of attorney. Marcus held medical power of attorney. The agents didn't say anything when I told them that, but they wrote it down. I kept going to work during those 4 months. I teach second grade at an elementary school in Cary, 20 minutes from our house. I kept going because the alternative was sitting alone in a house where every cabinet door was always closed now, and I couldn't do that. My students kept me sane. There is something stabilizing about being responsible for 22 7-year-olds who need you to know where the glue sticks are. Marcus called me twice during those months. I let both calls go to voicemail. He left messages that were warm and ordinary. Just checking in, thinking about you. Let me know if you need anything. His voice sounded exactly like a grieving brother who had nothing to hide. I didn't call back. His mother called too, and those calls I answered. She was lost in her own grief and her own fear about Robert's decline, and she had no idea what was happening around her. Talking to her was painful in a different way. She trusted Marcus completely, relied on him for everything connected to Robert's care and finances, and I knew what was coming and I couldn't tell her, and I hated every minute of that silence. The 4th month, I got a call from Agent Tara Voss, who had been my primary contact throughout the process. She asked me to come back to Charlotte. When I arrived, there were more people in the room this time. A federal prosecutor, Paul Whitfield, a victim advocate from the agency. Marcus had been arrested that morning. The charges included wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and because of the pattern of evidence around the car accident and Daniel's death, and because a forensic review of Daniel's medical records had flagged a question about a prescription that Daniel had never filled being found in his system at autopsy. A charge that I am going to say carefully because I still have to be careful with it. They were pursuing an additional investigation that had not yet resulted in a charge, but that Agent Voss described as something they were taking very seriously. I sat in that room and I held Paul's copy of Daniel's letter in my hands, and I thought about the gray Henley. I thought about the crossword puzzle and pen. I thought about every Sunday morning for 6 years, his voice from the other room on the phone with his mother, the sound of it, comfortable and unhurried. Not knowing that his brother was in the next call stealing from his father, while Daniel coached soccer and fixed things and loved everything in his life with his whole steady, quiet heart. Diane filed for divorce the week after the arrest. The financial accounts were frozen. An independent trustee was appointed to oversee Robert's care. Daniel's mother finally learned the full scope of what had happened, and that conversation, I wasn't there for it, but Paul was, and he told me about it afterward, apparently took most of a day and left everyone in the room wrecked. Marcus's trial is still pending. I won't go into the details of that because it isn't finished yet, and my attorney has asked me to be careful about what I say publicly. What I can tell you is that the case is strong. The documentation Daniel left is not circumstantial. It is real and it is specific, and it is the work of a man who spent 14 months making sure that even if he wasn't there, the truth would be. There is one more thing I want to tell you. Daniel and his college roommate had stayed close for the 10 years since graduation. His roommate's name was Kevin, and Kevin had passed away from an aggressive form of leukemia about 8 months before Daniel died. Kevin had a daughter, her name is Lily, and she was 9 years old when her father died and 11 now, and she had been living with Kevin's sister in Asheville, which was a fine situation but not a permanent one. Daniel had mentioned Lily to me twice in the year before he died, both times casually, both times ending with something like, "We should have them over sometime." I had agreed and we had never arranged it, and I had not thought about it again. In the for law enforcement document on the USB drive, in the very last paragraph, Daniel had written a note that was not for law enforcement at all. He had written it to me. He wrote that he had set aside money in a separate account, money Marcus hadn't touched because Marcus didn't know about it, and that he wanted it used to help Kevin's daughter if she ever needed it. He wrote her name. He wrote her age at the time. He wrote her age at the time. He wrote her age at the time of Kevin's sister in Asheville. He wrote, "You don't have to do anything with this, but if you can, Sarah, if you can." I drove to Asheville on a Saturday in February. Kevin's sister, a woman named Renee, answered the door with the expression of someone who had been bracing for difficult news for so long that she'd forgotten what regular news felt like. I told her I was Daniel's wife. She recognized my name. She invited me in. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She had Kevin's eyes, which I remembered from photographs, dark brown and very direct. She looked up when I walked in, and then looked back down at her work with the focused disinterest of a kid who has learned not to get her hopes up around adults she doesn't know. I sat down at that kitchen table. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just told her that her dad and my husband had been best friends, and that my husband had thought about her and wanted to make sure she was okay, and that I was there because of him. She looked up again. "Is he nice?" she asked. "Your husband?" I said yes. I said he was the nicest person I had ever known. She nodded like that settled something. Then she showed me her homework, which was a math worksheet, and asked if I was good at fractions. I told her I was a second-grade teacher. She said that probably meant I only knew easy fractions. I told her she wasn't wrong. We did the worksheet together. I cannot tell you where everything lands from here. The trial is coming. Robert's care is being handled. Daniel's mother knows the truth now, and that knowing is its own long grief on top of grief. The house in Raleigh still has a kitchen where I keep all the cabinet doors closed out of habit, and sometimes I open them all at once, just to see how it feels. What I know is this: my husband spent the last 14 months of his life doing something most people would have walked away from. He could have kept his head down. He could have told himself it wasn't his problem anymore after Marcus promised to fix it. He could have decided that protecting himself was more important than protecting the truth. He didn't. He built something careful and complete, and he made sure that even from wherever he was going, he would reach me. He trusted me to carry it the rest of the way. And I did. I keep the USB drive in the drawer next to the kitchen table. I don't know why I haven't moved it. Maybe I'm not ready to put it somewhere out of sight yet. Maybe it's just that it feels like the last thing he handed me, and I'm still not done holding it. If you've been carrying something alone, a secret, a fear, a truth you don't know how to bring into the light, I want you to know that there is another way. There are people who will help you. You don't have to wait until it's too late to make sure someone else knows. Daniel waited. He thought he was protecting me, and maybe he was, but I would have rather known. I would have rather stood beside him while he was still here. Don't wait. Tell someone you trust. And please, if this story meant something to you, subscribe to Her Silent Revenge. There are more stories here that I think you need to hear. Leave me a comment and tell me what you're thinking. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.